What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Dorm Squad Sports, a college sports podcast focused on Alabama athletics. I'm Dakota. Again, I'm without Bryant and Oakley because they're both still at home with their families for Christmas and the holiday. But after a game like that, I felt like we had to put something out because so much happened that we got to talk about today. And before I start anything, we're going to talk about the game. We're going to talk about Clemson. I also am going to answer some of the fan questions that y'all have sent in on Twitter and on my personal Snapchat. Going to make sure I handle all of that. But before we do any of that, if y'all could please subscribe to this podcast, leave a 5-star review on iTunes. You can subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on Twitter, and make sure you see what we're putting out there. Or just subscribe on your Apple Podcast app. Just search Storm Squad Sports and we'll be right there. Leave a review. Get in touch with us. We love to hear what y'all have to say. We really enjoy doing these Q&As, so if you keep sending in questions on iTunes, we'll be able to do them more often. But all that being said, let's go ahead and jump into this game. Of course, it was a huge game for Alabama. There was a lot riding on the fact that it was, a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback in that high-powered offense. And we haven't really faced anyone that potent of an offense this year. And we came out strong. Of course, we let up a little bit. But just the fact that we were able to come out there and get that early, I believe, 28-0 lead was just huge for momentum and just, trying to squash them out early. Of course, they did come back. We won 45-34. But all things considered, I think it was a really good game. Here's some of the good things that happened. First off, the run game emerged pretty much from the start. Of course, against a defense like that, you're expected to get more plays. But more importantly than just the running game emerged, Josh Jacobs emerged in this game. He's always been, he's been a really good player, and in the big moments, he started to shine a little bit more, especially in that SEC championship game a couple weeks ago. But he just had an absolute coming out party. He has NFL scouts just drooling, hoping he comes out this year. The way he can catch passes out of the backfield, he helps us run that pro-style, NFL-style offense. And whenever he goes into the NFL, he's going to make a team very, very happy. Of course, that's not to say, that our other running backs didn't play very well as well. Of course, Najee and Damian Harris both played out of their minds. And even Tua was able to get a couple scrambles for some positive yards. Of course, with that ankle, we're hoping he doesn't have to do that too often. But with this running, we're going to need to bring this running style into the Clemson game and hopefully get some success against that D-line. Another thing, honestly, you should have expected it. Everyone's been talking about it. But Tua just absolutely balled against this secondary, against this defense. One of the worst passing defenses in the country, if not the worst. And he just could do anything he wanted. Only had 3 incompletions, had 4 passing touchdowns. He just had his way with this secondary. And Clemson's defense is obviously going to be a lot better, so he's going to have to, work harder to get those plays. But their secondary specifically isn't the best, and most quality quarterbacks have just torn them apart, especially late in the year. So with, not a whole month's worth of rest and a whole month's worth of preparing, it's going to be interesting to see how they game plan against Tua. But he just had an excellent game, and he's definitely what helped carry us to victory. Another big player that stepped up, of course, defensive MVP, Xavier McKinney. Those wide receivers are NFL talent. Of course, Hollywood Brown, he played, but he didn't seem to be 100%. He had to sit out some. So, that's a bit of a mulligan on his part because of the injury that he suffered in the Big 12 championship game. But despite that, CeeDee Lamb was still, a really big player and playing in that secondary. The biggest thing was going to be, how Kyler played and if Kyler could run enough to get us to commit to the run and then beat us on the pass. And he was able to get a few scrambles, but he only got, 1 or 2 just absolute home run passes. And a lot of that's because Xavier McKinney did so well in coverage. So, not to take anything away from the other defense or the other defensive players because they played well, but Xavier McKinney really balled up. And another guy, or honestly, just another core, our receivers really stepped up, especially at the beginning of the game when Oklahoma was giving us, 10 yards of a cushion for every single receiver on every single play. Those RPOs worked pretty much to perfection, just how you want to run them. That first play by Devontae Smith, he took that slant or curl and he just went 50 yards on the very first play, just setting that tone early, and that really helped us. And that being said, there are some still bad things that happen, specifically our defense, and you expect it when you're going up against a guy like Kyler Murray, and he's just such a good talent, and nothing against, you're expected to make mistakes against this team. But specifically, in my opinion, Surtain and Mac Wilson had some tough games, and when you're going up against not just a player like Connor, but an offensive-minded coach like Lincoln Riley, he's going to throw so many things at you offensively to try to make something out of nothing and exploit your weaknesses. And it really falls on the linebacker and the leader of the team to pick up on it before the play call and pick up on what you've seen on film and apply that to what's happening in the game. And that's really tough to do against an offense like this. And, it's tough, but it's something that needs to be done. And there were a couple times where Mac Wilson wasn't able to do that for us. He also had a couple missed tackles. I mean, he didn't have a terrible game, but you were really expecting more and hoping for more, especially considering he's probably playing for a career right now. A lot of people believe that he will come out and go into the NFL draft. He'll be probably a first-round pick, but if he doesn't step up in the championship game and he still decides to go, he might fall into the second round, especially if he doesn't have a good combine or a good pro day. But he also might come back depending on how he plays. So this is going to be a really a pivotal point for him in his career to figure out what he does. And in Patrick Surtain's defense, there was a lot riding on these receivers, and CeeDee Lamb really did push off a lot. But that being said, you really, if it's not called, you can't do anything about it. So you can't just let it happen. I mean, there was an illegal pick play in the championship game against Clemson where they won on it, but they didn't call it, so there's nothing you can do about it. And that's the thing about this game is our next game, the receiver and the receiving core is pretty much just as good as what we went up against this week. And of course they have, the freshman Justin Ross, the guy that we try to get out of Phoenix City, and the freaking 17th year senior Hunter Renfro. And he's just that great player in the slot. Look, everyone expects him to be drafted by the Patriots at some point. He just seems to fit that kind of offense. And it's going to be interesting to see if we can fix our mistakes from this game and see if we can apply them into the championship game. And we kind of let up. That was another bad thing that happened for us. And we can't do that in games of this caliber. When we hit them in the mouth, we got that lead early and we kind of let up, made a few mistakes, and then that's what got them back in it. It's not going to work like that against Clemson. It's going to work like you hit them in the mouth, but you're not going to be able to hit them as hard as we were able to hit Oklahoma because they're so good at every position. Hitting them in the mouth is like getting a, 21-7 lead at best early or a 14-0 lead early. It's not 28-0. It's not straight 3-and-outs, straight scoring drives. You're going to have incompletions. You're going to have to get tough third downs. These plays are going to go and become tougher in a championship game against a team like this. So that's going to be really interesting to see if we can handle that and what happens there. Another thing that hurt us, I'm not going to say it necessarily hurt us, but the way that Kyler Murray was able to scramble, he got sacked 3 times in the game, but 2 of them were on the first drive, and then we were only getting 1 time the rest of the game. And honestly, he got tripped up on himself once, and plays like that are kind of hard to account for in terms of sacks. But in a game like that, I know Kyler is going to be a lot more run first in a mindset than Lawrence will be. But still, you have to be able to get plays like that, get negative yardage plays, because it's going to be harder to get in the run game because they have Travis Etienne. And I'm going to hit on that in just a second. But you have to be able to stop the quarterback from getting those throws off sometimes because he's going to be throwing darts in this game. Lawrence is an amazing quarterback with a heck of an arm, and Travis Etienne is a great running back who's going to be falling forward on tackles and getting first downs. So any big play to disrupt their momentum and their rhythm, like a sack or even a turnover. Those things need to happen. Another thing that happened for us is we weren't able to get a fumble or an interception against this team. It would be really huge if we could get something like that against Clemson, against Trevor Lawrence. We had plenty of, honestly, true interceptions just fall out of our hands. And those are plays that, against a team like Oklahoma, it's what makes it close. Against a team like Clemson, that's what makes you lose. So I know you can't do absolutely everything right, but there's still things that we need to work on and things we need to improve on. Okay, and another thing, penalties just absolutely kill us. Of course, they killed that one drive where we had to settle for a field goal because we had, I believe, like 3 penalties back to back to back. But I mean, those are things that we need to, fix on our end. Those aren't things that the other team does to us. They don't force you to hold unless they beat you. But you can get tackled. You don't have to hold. They don't force you to line up wrong. They don't force you to, make mistakes with the play clock or with a false start. Those are things that you do to yourself. And against a team like Clemson, against a D-line like Clemson, you just can't make mistakes like that. You can't beat yourself. You have to make them beat you. Because if you make a few mistakes, then they're just going to capitalize on them every single time. So those are things that we need to, wrap up in this game. Another thing, actually, let's just talk about Clemson. I believe that Trevor Lawrence is probably the second best quarterback from a passing standpoint we've seen this year behind Jake Fromm. I believe Kyler Murray is a better quarterback and better player, at least right now. But that being said, I think Trevor Lawrence can pass it better. He has probably one of the best deep balls in the country. Definitely out of, the teams we've faced, probably one of the best. And he's a better runner than Jake Fromm is. So it's a really dual threat that we're going to have to deal with. He doesn't like to specifically run, but he's very capable of doing it if he needs to. And, we've seen him take hit after hit this season. Of course, he got a head injury in his first start. But besides that, he just gets up, and he is a huge quarterback. He's like 6'5", I believe. And that type of, body can withstand more hits than a Kyler Murray or even a Tua. So he's willing to let you lay the boom on him, and he'll get right back up. He's really a tough player. And, of course, that paired with Travis Etienne, their running back, Etienne's a monster. There's no other way to put it. He is an absolute monster. So we're going to have to find a way to stop him. I feel good about it just because we haven't let star running backs, tear us up as much as you would expect compared to how many we've seen in the SEC. Off the top of my head, we've let Zeke Elliott do it. We've let Kerryon Johnson do it. And we've had, Nick Chubb and Sony Michel kind of like teamed up against us in the championship game. But even they didn't just, go for these all-pro, these, Heisman type of games. So I do feel better about that than if it was another, if we had a different type of defense. But we really do play the run well, especially with Quinnen Williams, assuming he'll be able to be 100% in this game, which I'll get on that later in the questions. And assuming that their suspended players come back, that defensive line is just absolutely nasty. We've struggled against defensive lines that have, NFL talent on them. And this one has NFL talent from end to end. Every single player on that line is going to go and make money on Sundays. Of course, that is assuming Dexter Lawrence comes back. But even his replacement in that game yesterday, he stepped up and played pretty much just as well as they could have expected Lawrence to play. So they have the depth too, which makes it hard in a game like that. Now, when you play like that, if you were able to keep them on the field for too long, it wears them out. But when you have that depth, it doesn't affect it as much because they can sub regularly like we did a few years ago when we had a solid 11 or 12 players in our front seven who all made it to the NFL. And that's, you have your packages and you just sub in and out and you just don't miss a beat. That's how they play on this defensive line. And another thing with the way they play back to offense, like I said, their receiving core is just stellar. Of course, Ross is only a freshman, but we saw him against Notre Dame make play after play, and he's going to try to make those plays against Alabama. And, of course, Hunter Renfrow, this is his 4th time to play this team. He might as well just be an Alabama player at this point as much as he's played us. But it's going to be really hard to stop them. Of course, they're not as creative on offense as, say, Oklahoma is. Dabo's he's a good offense and defensive mind, don't get me wrong, but he's also just not as high caliber as a Lincoln Riley is in terms of scheme. But that's not going to stop him from getting creative plays in there. So you never know. And the stat kind of hurts, but in their semifinal game, they had 6 sacks against Notre Dame, and Notre Dame's a pretty good team. Of course, they're not. I honestly don't think they should. I'm not going to say they shouldn't make the playoff, but I think they proved that they don't deserve a chance to win the championship. I'll say that much. And they still, without Dexter Lawrence, got 6 sacks on that team. And that's really going to be a big key, is if we can keep Tua's jersey clean, keep him from getting injured, give him enough time in that pocket to make those throws and those plays. Because if we have enough time, we're going to be able to get Judy or Smith or anyone open on the deep ball. The way their secondary plays, they've really struggled against, high potent offenses. Even, the 2 SEC quarterbacks they faced, Mond and Jake Bentley, both of them just tore this defense up, especially on the secondary. So those are things that we're going to have to do. But if we don't have enough time with Tua in the pocket, we're not going to have those routes be able to develop. We're going to have to settle for the hitches and the 5-yard routes and the checkdowns, which that might work, but you really hope that we can just, open the top off on this defense and make something happen deep. But when you flip it the other way, that's what they're going to be trying to do to us. So we really need to see our secondary step up, because this receiving core is just so talented that, we saw what they did at Notre Dame, and I believe we're a better secondary than Notre Dame. That being said, I still think it's going to be tough, just because if they get open, Lawrence is going to give them the ball, and they're going to make the catch, and if they have enough space, they're going to make you miss. That's just how they play. So it's really going to be a big game for us in terms of the passing game. I feel a lot more confident stopping their running game than stopping their passing game. And honestly, I'm not sure which one I feel more confident on our end, because with a defensive line like that, you really want to try to get outside of the box and hit them on the edge. So I feel like if we can get runs to the outside, or swing passes or jet sweeps, I think that's going to help against a team like this. But still have to play the 60 minutes. And another thing that is going to hurt is the fact that we're not going to get Deontay Brown back on that offensive line. Of course, he was suspended for whatever NCAA violation, breaking team rules, however they decided to define it. But Nick Saban has said, I believe, that he's not coming back for this game either. None of the players are. So not having those players back, the only one that really matters is Brown. And our offensive line did really well. Of course, only allowed 1 sack in this game, but they are going to have their work cut out for them against this defensive line. It's going to be really hard for us, and we're just going to have to see what happens. And another thing that's kind of an X factor, they have a lot of seniors on this team. They have a lot of players, especially on that D-line, but honestly all over the field, they could be playing in the NFL right now. But they decided that they wanted to come back because we left a bad taste in their mouth last year in that semifinal game, and they wanted to end on a championship, and they wanted to end a season beating Alabama. And that's where we're at right now. And they're going to, the other teams that have seniors coming back that we've played hasn't worked out for them. Of course, Georgia had some players come back and say, we're coming back because we want to beat this team, and it didn't work for them. But that being, even last year they had a lot of seniors on that team who came back to win a championship because they thought they had the pieces. But all that being said, it hasn't worked out for them. But we haven't faced any kind of monster like the monster that we're going to face against Clemson. They are just so talented on both sides of the ball that we're going to have to make plays, and it's going to be tough sometimes. But we're probably going to put at least something out somewhere around the championship game. Probably with me and Maddie, we're going to break this down a little bit further, because Maddie's going to be coming home right before the championship game, my girlfriend. Of course, we've already had her on an episode of the podcast. So we're probably going to record something, the two of us, so make sure you stay out for that. Another reason why you subscribe to the podcast. But let's go ahead and answer some questions. Of course, I put out on Twitter and I put on my personal Snapchat having people ask questions. Most of them are football related. One or two are just University of Alabama related. But first one, what's our opinion regarding the defensive laxity on after a hot start? So what caused that slump? And honestly, I think it's just the fact that playing in an environment like that with it being so hot and they had to stay on the field so long because we were scoring really fast. And I think they just got gassed. I mean, there's no other way to put it, in my opinion. And it's tough because you don't want that to happen. But it's when you play in Tampa and it's, over 100-degree weather, you just can't prepare for that. Hopefully it won't be like that when we go for the championship game. Also, and these are from Whitney, by the way, and Whitney also asked about injuries to Miller, Q, and Jennings. I did some research on this, and it was Saban pretty much said the only injury he's concerned about is Christian Miller. I also saw, let me see if I can find it real quick, on 24/7 Sports, they said that AL.com's Matt Zenit say the injury as say it wasn't considered serious, but that's the only thing I've heard about that. Saban said that we're going to get an MRI today to figure out the severity of it. And honestly, it looked really bad. He wasn't able to put weight on that leg with the hamstring injury. And hamstring injuries, they take a while to recover from. So I'm nervous. I'm not going to lie. He is a huge player, especially we're already weak at that linebacker position. We're really going to need him back. So hopefully we'll get him. Another thing that will be big on that is if we could possibly get Terrell Lewis or Christopher Allen back. Those players are going to be really huge for us. And we haven't had them, all year, obviously. And we've just been kind of toying with the question of if we're going to be able to get them back. And we haven't all year. And we've played well without them, but that's when we've played with Miller. And if there's some way that they could come back, that'd be huge. Terrell Lewis dressed in his his clothes and not pads, but Christopher Allen dressed in pads and did through warm-ups, but he didn't play. I haven't heard anything about if they're going to be able to play. Of course, everyone said they're right where they need to be in terms of their development, in terms of their injury rehab, but right where they need to be doesn't necessarily mean preparing for a game. So even if we can just get them for a few plays, that'd be big. But Mosley stepped in place of Miller in the game when he got injured, and he's a senior, so he has enough experience. Of course, he never really plays a whole lot, but I mean, fingers crossed on that. Best case scenario, we get Miller back, near 100%. It's just, something minor, but you never know. And in terms of Q and Jennings, I'm pretty sure Q was just him being gassed in that game. Of course, he was on the field a lot, having to run a lot, trying to handle Kyler Murray. And it was really hot, and that affects D linemen and O linemen more than anybody else because they just play so much. And, they're just bigger guys, so they're not used to, having to run that much in the heat. Their game is more, bursts of speed and not, the huge endurance plays. And it took a lot of endurance, and I think they'll be fine. Saban said the only one they're really worried about is Miller. But anyway, great question. Another question, this came from Jared on my Snapchat. Do you feel after Tua's performance tonight that he deserves the Heisman? And I'm going to go on a mini rant right here. A lot of people have been saying it, and I think this year, out of pretty much any year, is the reason to do it. This and then maybe the Texas USC game with Reggie Bush in '05 are the biggest proponents for it. And honestly, maybe even Deshaun Watson in his championship year where they gave it to Lamar Jackson. I think that you should wait until the end of the season after the national championship to declare a Heisman winner. So many people win the Heisman and then they play and it's just they don't look as good, honestly. And if we're allowed to keep the SEC or the conference championship as part of your decision making, it makes zero sense why we shouldn't allow the Pro Bowl. I think that it would make for the NCAA. Now, I support players who don't play in their bowl games in order to prepare for the NFL. I think that's a good thing for them. But obviously, the NCAA wants those players to come back because it's a revenue stream. And I think it would really incentivize players who are, close to winning a trophy to come back for their bowl games if you count that. But when you say, all right, all that's left is this bowl game, all the trophies are done, your stats are in, this is just for bragging rights and an experience. Well, they're going to get a lot more bragging rights and experience in the NFL, and they're preparing for that instead. But when you still leave something on the line besides a win or loss that honestly most people forget about, I mean, I could ask you who won, whatever bowl 2 years ago. People aren't going to be able to tell you, but I can ask, how good was this team a couple years ago, and they'll let you know. But it's just, I believe that it makes a lot more sense to wait until after the championship game to figure out who the Heisman is. And I think a lot of other people would have won Heismans who probably deserved it more. And I believe that Tua, after playing this game, would have won the Heisman. I don't like the fact that one injury kept him from winning it in the first place. I thought that was pretty dumb. But, I mean, what you going to do? It's just, I guess that's just how it goes now. Another question, Derek, this is about if we had any information on Williams. And again, I honestly think it's just being gassed, just fatigue in that hot of an environment. Of course, you're used to playing either, in Alabama where it's pretty hot, but further on into the year, you don't get these really, 105-degree weather games, or you're used to playing in a dome. All the postseason games we usually play are in a dome. This one wasn't, so it's hard to control that temperature, which makes it, really tough. But I'm not concerned at all about him. And then another question from Derek was, do you think Alabama plays Trevor Lawrence better than we did Murray from a containment standpoint? I believe so, mostly because Lawrence is a throw first player. So if you're talking strictly containment, I think that it's going to be easier to contain him. He doesn't really break free for those huge, 20, 30-yard runs. If he breaks free, it's those, third and medium, third and longs. Everything's covered, and he manages to get a first down, which those can be back-breaking. But I think we did really well against Kyler Murray. But I also believe that with Lawrence, I'm more concerned about how he's going to beat us in the air. If you're talking about from a whole game, it's going to be really hard to contain him because he is just an absolute talent. But I believe just from a containment standpoint, we should be able to sack him relatively well. I think he got sacked, I want to say 3 times against Notre Dame. Hopefully we can get, somewhere between like 3 to 6 sacks on him. I think that would be good for us. And also, he only had 4 rushes in that game that, weren't sacks. So he really didn't do a lot against Notre Dame, and I don't really expect him to do a lot against us from that perspective. Now, that doesn't mean he's not going to be able to tear us up with his arm, but you never know. Okay. And also, a question from Cindy, this is more about just Alabama, was how about majors at Alabama. This is, strictly going to university there. And here's my thought on majors. Everyone says that their engineering school isn't the best. I will say this. I believe that the engineering school is really tough, and it really prepares you. So if you go to Alabama for engineering, be prepared because it is really hard. Anywhere in an engineering degree is tough, don't get me wrong. But, I know people who took those classes, they're really tough. Most people, honestly, I'm not trying to talk crap about anybody, but the communications major is usually the one that people take if they just want to get a degree. So many people take poli-sci at Alabama, and honestly, I don't even know what you do with poli-sci besides hopefully go to law school. But going to law school is so tough. I don't get it, honestly. Business major, that's what all 3 members of the dorm squad are. We're all different things in the business college. And it's tough, but it's nowhere near as hard as the other majors, honestly. I think it prepares you really well. Of course, I'm management. Oakley, Bryant, they're both MIS. MIS is incredibly tough. And you take all your MIS classes like your 3rd and 4th year. But everyone believes that MIS is the hardest business major. But in terms of just other business majors, I mean, it challenges you and it prepares you, but it's nothing that, isn't out of the realm of possibility for most students, in my opinion. I haven't heard of a lot of people who, go for a business degree and then have to back out of it because it was too hard. Whereas you see a lot of people in the medical majors or the engineering majors that have to either change or switch schools or do something because it's so hard, which obviously it should be. But in business, if you're determined and you want to go for a business major, I think most people would be able to accomplish it. All right, two more questions left. The first one came from Alex, and it asked, do you think that this proves that we don't need to expand the playoff? And I think it absolutely does. When you look at what happened this game, honestly, both games, this would be the perfect year to have a BCS championship, in all honesty. There were two teams that were just above everybody else. I think that Oklahoma was the third best team, and I believe that, honestly, Georgia might have been the fourth best team. Of course, you have to put Notre Dame in there because they went undefeated and they played Power 5 schools, and you have to respect that. And it would send too bad of a message if they didn't put Notre Dame in. But you just have to think about it. And if these games aren't competitive, then how is Alabama-Michigan going to be competitive? How is Alabama-Washington going to be competitive? How is, Clemson-UCF? How are those games going to be competitive? If what you say is the second and third best team, there should be no one who is worse than Clemson and better than Notre Dame in the country, is what you're saying if you rank them second and third. And you still have an absolute blowout. And instead of playing that team, you want Clemson to play, an LSU or a Florida or a Michigan or an Ohio State. Even a UCF. Like, those teams, in my opinion, are worse than Notre Dame. And that game would have been even more embarrassing. If you expand to 8 teams, what you're saying is, I don't care about who the best team is. I care about having the most games, spreading this out, and honestly making money. I believe that March Madness for basketball does not tell you who the best team is, but it puts on a show, and that's why people keep up with it. Because, honestly, UMBC is not a better team than Michigan, but they beat them in one game, so then they move on, and Virginia's, out in the first round of March Madness. You can win a game and not be better than a team. Honestly, does everyone believe that LSU is better than Georgia because LSU beat Georgia? No. Do you believe that Purdue is better than Ohio State because they beat Ohio State? Probably not. When you make it to one game and you're in or you're out, you have to put everyone in the field as a team that you honestly believe could be one of the best teams in the country, or the best team in the country. And you cannot debate that Ohio State and Michigan and UCF and LSU and Texas and all these teams, you cannot debate that those teams are arguably the best team in the country. You have to do it strictly. If you think they might be the best team, then they deserve a chance to prove it. And if you don't, they don't need to be there because upsets happen, but an upset doesn't make you the best team in the country. So that's where I stand on it, and it's tough. But I think that 4 teams is a good number. I think that, spreads us out a little bit better. Maybe you can choose the 4 teams a little bit better, but I like the system we have right now. And if we expand it past that, doing automatic conference bids to me is just absolutely idiotic, because then it gives a team, like Northwestern, the same chance that Alabama or Georgia has. And that doesn't make any sense to me, or it guarantees that the Pac-12 is going to get a team when they're not. And honestly, the tides are going to turn at some point. Alabama's not going to be the greatest team in the country forever. So all these teams that are, rooting for it, that's just because they're losing right now. Sooner or later, we might be in a situation where the Big 12 is the best conference in college football, or the Pac-12 is. You never know. And when that happens, these teams aren't going to want anyone else to get into their playoff. like they're wanting to get in our playoff. So you have to make something that's consistent and stays with the test of time. And the BCS obviously didn't do that. I think that the 14 playoff, the way it's done right now, is our best chance. It's flawed, but it's sports, and sports are flawed. You don't make anything perfect. Perfect. I mean, overtime rules in the NFL are dumb that leave ties. That's a flaw. Clear path rules in the NBA are dumb. That's a flaw. NBA used to let, if you won your division, you were guaranteed a top 4 seed. So you could be, middle of the road and be put at a 3 seed when, a 60-win team who is second in their conference could be they'd probably be in there. But, like, that's how it works, where you just got in, and that's a flaw. And there are flaws in everything you do. Like, for example, NFL, there's a flaw right now that's going to put the Chargers in the wild card game when they might end up with, the second best. They're going to travel when they're definitely going to have one of the 4 best records, if not the second best record in their own conference. There are flaws in sports. That's how it works. You're not going to make a perfect system. And the more you try to make a perfect system, the more you're going to make mistakes. So I think we need to keep it the way it is, but that's just my take. And the last question from Sierra is a quick score prediction on this Clemson-Alabama national championship game. And we're going to, come out with more of that later, and we're going to go into more depth. I think we win somewhere in the, 3 to 10 point range. I think it's going to be very close. I think it's going to be in the mid 30s. Right now, I'll say 30. I'll say 35-31 right now. I think that's a respectable score. But we'll dive into that a little bit more in the next episode when it's me and Maddie. But anyway, a little bit longer than I expected this episode to be, but there's a lot of stuff we had to talk about. So make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Twitter. Do, however you want to stay in touch. Leave those reviews, leave comments in the reviews, and have a happy week. And I guess next week's not game day, but have a happy week and Roll Tide.